It's part 1.5 of Another Eden's main story called Ogre Wars, Dirge of the Fated King and the Sacred Sword. We start where we left off in main story part 1 with our heroes discussing how they can save Fine's biological brother Eden, as well as find Altina and her brother, the Beast King, whose lives Fine may have subconsciously saved. The mayor says strange things are happening in the ancient battlefield located in the Duskan lands east of the Beast King's castle, so our heroes go to investigate. We get a flashback of a young Beast King who we now know is named Gildner in the Moonlight Forest, but instead of seeing baby Fine like how we saw in the start of the game, he sees the present day version of Fine. She tells him he doesn't have to spend 16 years becoming the hateful Beast King. He's teleported to Snakebone Island where an also alive Altina greets him. So it seems Fine used her Geoprisma to somehow revive Gildner by bringing his past version to a hero's present. If you've forgotten, both Gildner and Altina sort of sacrificed themselves in main story part 1. Watch my main story part 1 video to catch up. Altina explains that Fine saw the good in Gildner and gave him another chance. And just like that, Gildner changes his mind about wanting to destroy all humans. Instead, he wants to carve out another dream on the planet. Gildner doesn't take much convincing to do a 180, does he? The heroes arrive at the ancient battlefield along with Deirdre and Annabelle, who you get to know more in a special chapter called Two Knights of the Holy Sword. Aldo feels Ogre Rancorum rattling in its sheath, but thinks it's his imagination. As they progress, they realize that the ancient battlefield is filled with the cries and spirits of the dead. They briefly discuss Annabelle's deliverance sword, a sword inspirited with the pure power of prayers. Deirdre says there are also rumors about a demon sword wielder, but then changes the subject. Mysterious! Ogre Rancorum awakens to the feeling of his fellow ogres from the past. He controls Aldo into slashing open a new dimension, revealing an ogre stronghold called Ogre Spike. An army of ogres and humans from 3,000 years ago gets released, including the legendary Thunder King. The Thunder King sees Ogre Rancorum and calls it Pulsifal's blade, and in turn Ogre Rancorum calls out to Thunder King's sword. Our heroes and Ogre Rancorum try and convince the ogres that they came from the past and that their clan is eventually completely wiped out by the humans. The ogres' rage then formed the blade that is now Ogre Rancorum. The ogres won't believe them, so our heroes, as usual, beat the living pulp out of them. Zenon Ogre, the king of the ogre clan, makes an appearance. Ogre Rancorum says the final grain of 3,000 years of sand has fallen and the bounds of Gaia melody unwoven. What? Don't worry, it'll make sense later. Just remember this reference to the Gaia melody. Ogre Rancorum sparks a connection with Zenon, who now becomes convinced of their situation. Zenon Ogre takes his leave and puts a barrier around Ogre's spike so no one may enter. Our heroes invite Thunder King to return to Unigan to meet King Miglan so they can decide on what they should do about these pesky ogres. But what about Ogre Rancorum? Ogre Rancorum says he's willing to honor his vow to fight alongside Aldo and put aside his grudge against the Thunder King in the meantime. He says he wishes to test his own might against what was once the Ogre clan. They meet King Miglance at Miglan's castle, and the two kings flop out their Pulsifal swords and instantly form a bromance, baby. Gathering at the Unigan Inn, our heroes brainstorm ways to bring the Thunder King and Ogre clan back to their own timeline to prevent anything catastrophic from happening. They decide to go to the truth-seeking mirror at the bottom of the castle for some clues. It tells them that the sacred sword was created from an ancient stone in a time when titans ruled the world. Remember these titans for a later story recap. After the titans disappeared, the sacred sword was discovered by humans and passed down the royal line, reaching the Thunder King, who then used this sword to beat the ogres in a war over 3,000 years ago. In the final battle, the ogre spirits possessed the sword and it was reborn as the demon sword Ogre Rancorum. King Miglance then wonders that if the Thunder King's sword became Ogre Rancorum, what sword was given to him? The mirror doesn't know the answer, but she does say the ogres feared the blade and seek these things called the elemental arms. The mirror said this process will create the ultimate power, but it is yet to come. She then says for the Thunder King to return to his timeline, he needs to seek a conclusion from the ogre clan, i.e. destroy them. The king gets a report of mysterious beasts in Snakebone Island, so our heroes investigate and finally meet the now alive Altina and a much younger beast king, Gildner. They explain that Fine's Geoprisma saved their lives, which is why they had the green glow before they apparently died in main story part 1. And now, it seems that their days of battling are behind them and they're using the second chance at life to consider building something new. Aldo and friends hear rumors of a black-winged monster in Snakebone Island and visit the beast village, Conium, where they see Gildner and Altena once again. Varus, who was Beast King's lackey in part 1, is now on friendlier terms with our heroes. We also meet Varus's well-endowed twin sister, who happens to be a new character, Myris. Varus transforms to his non-combat form, who looks like a super buff, super polite gamer and salaryman. He says his persona also changes when he changes form. Gildner says that when Kronos Umbra, the trippy dimension place he tried to rescue the real Eden from in part 1, fell, some of its corrupted prisma scattered around the land. Now, any beast that comes upon this prisma turns feral. In other words, it's a plot device to explain why we have a lot of big monsters to beat in the game. Aldo and Gildner team up, and to help gain power for the journey ahead, Gildner suggests they get a blessing from the Genesis Dragon God. They meet this really handsome beast called the Archives Guard at the Beast King's castle for a hint on where to find the Dragon God. In turn, the Archives God gives them the Genesis Dragon God scroll. They venture through to the top part of the island, Snake Skull, and get attacked by the rumored flying black beast who Gildner calls Angurus. Angurus? It seems to be drawn to Altena. It's joined by another huge monster, which Rika says is a prisma mutated part of the body of Gildner. In other words, they're a good reason for a cool looking boss battle. After the fight, the super handsome Zenon Ogre appears with his lackeys and take Altena, saying they have use for her. Before leaving, Zenon Ogre observes that Gildner carries the crimson blade of the fire spirit Salamander. That fire spirit from part 1 who sacrificed himself along with the other great spirits to save the world. Zenon confirms that Gildner's sword is one of the 4 elemental arms. Zenon then demands our heroes bring him the 4 elemental arms in return for Altena. Our heroes convene to figure out how they can get through Ogre Spike's barrier. They decide that the elements may know something, and Sarah suggests they visit the straw dummy in Actul. The speaking straw dummy recommends our heroes go to Purgatory, the place between the living and the dead. By leveraging the spirit from the land, he'll open a portal to Purgatory for them. At the same time, he'll sculpt the energy into phantom versions of the 4 great spirits, whatever that means. In Purgatory, they meet Mini-Manders, Salamander's little helpers. They warn our heroes that getting the elemental arms from the great elements won't be an easy feat, and there's already trouble brewing in Purgatory. Remember these Mini-Manders, as we'll keep seeing them throughout the game. Our heroes beat the Earth Spirit, the Elemental Gnome, to get the Earth Spirit's axe. They beat the Water Elemental Spirit, Undine, to get the Water Spirit's katana. They beat the Fire Spirit, Salamander, for the Fire Spirit sword. Gildner says it's quite distinct from his Crimson Blade, probably to avoid a weird plot hole. They beat the Wind Spirit, Sylph, to get the Wind Spirit's lance. Equipped with the elemental arms, our heroes return to the ancient battlefield to confront Zenon Ogre. Gildner hands over the weapons in exchange for Altena, and strangely enough, Zenon hands back Altena, no strings attached. Zenon then asks Gildner if the bodies of the beasts harbor great elemental power, and if the body of a member of the royal family would have more. Okay, so there were strings attached. Zenon does some crazy magic to merge the power of the elements, Altena included, to create an ultimate elemental weapon. Zenon says he can wipe them out then and there with this new weapon, but he says when it comes to ogres, the greater the battle, the greater his fulfillment when he stands victorious. To him, he'll only feel satisfied if he wins a true battle. So he challenges our heroes to prepare everything they've got to take him on with full strength. Aldo and friends return to the future to ask Sebastian if she knows how they could break the barrier surrounding Ogre Spike. Sebastian does some research and finds that a giant stone was discovered some time back called the Ogre Key. The key was supposedly stored in Macmillan Museum, but it has since shut down because the owner was scammed by a phony statue and ran out of money. Amy and Cyrus remember there's someone at Time's Forgotten Stop who mentioned something about Macmillan. Before they head off, Sebastian warns Amy that there's a new organization on the loose who may be of danger. They claim to have been exposed to Fine's Geoprisma, who call themselves neo-humans and want to overthrow society. At Time's Forgotten Stop, a lady tells them the original founder of Macmillan Museum's career kicked off after an incident in the ancient battlefield when he made friends with the Nopo clan. Sebastian's research was right. They find Macmillan in the ancient battlefield with the Nopo. Macmillan, having been scammed before, doesn't believe Aldo and Amy's story about how his descendants will build a museum in the future. Aldo and Amy fly to the future, get a brochure from the Macmillan Museum, and fly back to Macmillan with a brochure to persuade him they're not scammers. Spotting a logo he designed in secret in the brochure, Macmillan finally believes them. He vows to work 10 times as hard to make sure he succeeds and puts plans in place so his lineage will never fall for a scam and lose their money again. Aldo hurries to the future to see if the plan worked, but unfortunately it didn't. The museum was still shut down. They go to El Zion to talk to an archaeology buff who looks exactly like Macmillan. They persuade him to donate something to help restore the museum, and he gives them an ancient stone called the Karma Stone. They give the Karma Stone to the original Macmillan in hopes that it will help the museum remain successful. They return to the future, and look, it worked! The museum is still open. Not only that, the archaeology buff passes Aldo and Amy a touching letter from the original Macmillan about how, although he himself will never see the museum, he knows the future is bright thanks to their help. Aldo and friends finally find the Ogre Key in the museum, but before they can celebrate, they are rudely interrupted by members of the Neo-Humans who Sebastian warned Amy about. They're Mildy and Clughorn. Clughorn was Amy's first love, and Mildy was Amy's best friend before she stole Clughorn away. What? They use some fancy powers to steal the key away from our heroes. Meanwhile, the Thunder King has a bromance moment with King Miglance and confesses to him that a powerful mage cast him with a nasty spell. Now he has no more than 6 months left to live. Back to Aldo and Amy, who are clearly annoyed by the turn of events. They run back to Mummy Sebastian for help. Sebastian locates Mildy and Clughorn at an abandoned theme park called Toto Dreamland. As they venture through the abandoned amusement park, Amy reminisces on a friendship with Mildy and how Mildy was the one who could make Clughorn smile. Amy acted as sort of like Mildy's protector, but then Clughorn came in and took her role. They finally reach Mildy and Clughorn, who say they want to give the Ogre Key to their compatriots. Our heroes beat them to a pulp and get the Ogre Key. Before running off, Mildy and Clughorn say they, the Chrono clan, will be the ones to guide the planet's future and that their leader will change the world. Remember the Chrono clan for another video. Our heroes convene with King Miglance, the Thunder King, and surprisingly, Varus, who's apparently there to help sharpen the King's blades. The Thunder King talks to Aldo in private, and he tells Aldo that he reminds him of his deceased son, and the Thunder King says that after this final battle, he will soon be reunited with his wife and son, implying that he will see them in the afterlife. The Gallery Master appears from nowhere, and he says he was the one who told Varus to sharpen his blades. Varus hands the old man the blades, and in turn, the old man returns the blades to the kings. The Gallery Master then says something odd. The final note of the Gaia melody will be played at Ogre Spike. Remember earlier when Ogre Rankra mentioned the Gaia melody? This is another hint of what's to come. Stay tuned. With the sharpened blades, our heroes, along with Annabelle and Deidre, as well as the Thunder Lion soldiers and Miglance's knights, get ready for battle and lay a siege on Ogre Spike. As they battle away, our main heroes encounter 2 huge ogres, Hell Ogre and Death Ogre, and they bring up the fact that the Thunder King's son started a romance with Zenon's daughter. For anyone who's played Elga's side quest, here's a spoiler with a disturbing content warning. So Elga, as I just said, is the daughter of the Ogre King Zenon. She got into a Romeo and Juliet forbidden love type situation with the Thunder King's son, Alfaldo. But their ending is far worse than Romeo and Juliet. The ogres kill Alfaldo, and Elga doesn't know this, but they feed him to her. She only finds out once she finds his ring in the meat she's eating. Ever since, she becomes a pure vegetarian. Now back to the main story. Hell Ogre and Death Ogre have a laugh about how delicious Alfaldo was. Our heroes shut them up by beating them senseless, and after the battle, out comes Ogre Baron, who boasts being the 7th generation of the noble house Ghost, or however it's pronounced, supposedly a family of supreme prestige. He and our heroes talk smack, but the battle is interrupted when Baron is summoned by Zenon. To add to the drama, Ogre Rankram finally speaks, and he says it's time for the Thunder King to meet his end. Aldo passes out and reawakens, fully possessed by Ogre Rankarim. He tells all his friends not to worry because even though he'll slay the Thunder King, he'll also slay Zen and Ogre. After all, he wouldn't exist if the ogres don't die. Rankrum starts to strike Fine, but something within Aldo's body resists. The now controlled ogre Aldo runs away to confront the Thunder King, but Aldo's besties arrive just before something terrible happens. They convince Ogre Rankrum to leave Aldo's body in the same way they solve every problem in the game, through violence. They beat Ogre Aldo to a pulp and he finally comes to his senses and leaves the real Aldo alone. Aldo threatens to throw Ogre Rankrum away, but the cursed sword promises to behave, for now at least. Our heroes progress through Ogre Spike and find that the path to Ogre Zenon's throne, Dominion Spire, is sealed by Ogre Baron's magic. They confront Ogre Baron, who says that he seeks the silence of the Gaia melody. Remember the Gaia melody? He says that if the two Pulsifolds and Rankrum were to be reunited, it would spell trouble for the ogres. He says the coexistence of the three swords, King Miglance's sword, the Thunder King's sword, and Ogre Rankrum, defies all logic and is nothing short of miraculous. After all, we still don't know how King Miglance got his sword. Ogre Baron says as soon as the victor is decided, so too will the sword's fates be. Baron also reveals to them the Thunder King's secret, that he's soon dying. Our heroes beat Ogre Baron to a pulp and he surrenders and quickly changes teams. He says he's more than happy to serve under them than Ogre Zenon and opens the gate. The two kings and an army finally reach Zenon. Zenon uses his elemental greatsword to fully wipe out the army, leaving only the two kings behind. The kings fight Zenon Ogre to no success. Just as Zenon Ogre is about to win the fight, the king's swords glow. Aldo and friends arrive. Aldo draws Ogre Rankrum, and thus, with the two king's swords and Ogre Rankrum in the same place, the Gaia melody, which was hinted at many times earlier, is finally activated. Ogre Rankrum says the song calls to him, telling him to guide the Ogre clan to their fate, complete annihilation. Zenon Ogre is defeated, but before giving up, he transforms into final boss form, which gets defeated too. After the second defeat, Zenon attempts to beat them one more time, but the two kings, Aldo and Gilner, resist with their swords, and the Thunder King, using the last of his energy, throws his sword into Zenon Ogre like a javelin. And look, we get a fancy cutscene! The spirits of the dead ogres get sucked into the sword that pierced Zenon, transforming it into Ogre Rankrum. Ogre Baron watches from the distance and takes his leave. Our heroes look at the newly formed Ogre Rankrum. The Thunder King observes that everything is as exactly as it should have happened. The humans beat the ogres, and the spirit of the ogres consume his blade to become Ogre Rankrum. But that doesn't explain one thing. Why King Miglance, whose sword was supposedly handed down the generations from King Pulsifol to the Thunder King and so on, remains as is, while Aldo, who is from the same timeline as King Miglance, also has an Ogre Rankrum. Ogre Rankrum reveals that King Miglance is holding the blade the Thunder King brought to his timeline. The sword that was used to pierce Zenon's chest was actually King Miglance's original sword before the Thunder King and all the ogres appeared. This is because at some point during this war, the swords were switched. We'll get to the culprit soon, but in summary, at some point in the Ogre War, someone swapped the Thunder King's and Miglance's swords around. So the sword Thunder King threw into Zenon was actually King Miglance's sword. So the holy sword that remains is the Thunder King's sword, which King Miglance has been unknowingly using when the swords were switched. The Ogre Spike, the Thunder King and his army return to his era, and Gilner breaks apart the elemental arms to get Altina back. Yay! During a confetti-filled victory celebration in Unigon, our heroes begin to wonder when the king's swords were swapped. Varus said that the gallery master was the one who sharpened the swords, and he was the one who returned them to the king. So was he the one who swapped the swords? Gilner gets a hunch that if the swords weren't swapped, King Miglance's sword would have been the one that was cursed, completely changing the outcome of time. Ogre Rankrum says that if it wasn't for the gallery master meddling with the swords, he would have awakened to a world without the holy blade. So it seems like the gallery master swapped the swords to make sure the timeline stays intact. King Miglance keeps his holy sword and Aldo keeps Ogre Rankrum. So it pretty much means all the main stuff in the game remains as it was before the Ogre Wars started. So was any of this actually canon? And the answer is yes, because Ogre Rankrum hints at the next part of the main story. He says that if he is to destroy the goddess of time, he needs Aldo's help. Aldo is like, what? and Ogre Rankram says he will know the meaning soon enough. And remember, we still have unanswered questions about Mildy, Clughorn, and the Chrono clan, and of course, Eden still needs to be rescued. And we have another post-main story montage sequence. We see a red balloon floating into the sky, and King Miglance, now swordless, as he gave his holy sword to the Thunder King. And he tells Aldo he can keep the Ogre Rankarim until the curse is lifted. We see the Thunder King taking his last breaths by the Tree of Eternity, where he once shared his dreams with his wife. He leaves Ogre Rankram there and promises to leave his soul a little while in the world longer so that he can look after Aldo. He then says his wife and son's names, Fiona and Alfaldo, which are so similar to the names of our sibling heroes Fine and Aldo. This can't be a coincidence, man. And in the rest of the montage, we see the mayor, Fine and Altina having fun in Barrawalkie, and main hero Sebastian, the archaeology buffs, with a cameo by the gacha character Suzette in the Macmillan Museum. We see Amy looking longingly in the distance. We see King Miglance with his knights, and in the front row are Deidre, Annabelle, Lachesis, and Soira, Gilna, Morris, and Varys in Conium, and an odd closing shot of two mascots looking like they're surrounded by Prisma in the abandoned Toto Dreamland. And post credits, we see Aldo once again being woken up by Fine, nope, it's Rika, imitating Fine's voice, telling Aldo that there's no time for the present. It's time for our heroes to set out on another adventure. In the meantime, check my part 1 story recap and like and subscribe for the fantastic main story part 2. And if you want to support my work, donate a thanks or become a super member.